I find it's interesting that she's planning to unveil basically a $100 billion plan to fight the opioid crisis. And it's a serious issue in this country. A lot of Americans are addicted to opioids. And it's just another, and look, it's another problem to the war on drugs that's happening in this country. So, Daniel, what is Senator Elizabeth Warren's plan to really deal with the opioid crisis?
Okay, so Warren has just put forward a bill, she's about to unveil a bill that is a 10-year bill, which means it'll take place over 10 years. It's $100 billion. She's planning to use the previous tax proposal that she's put out to charge the top 75,000 richest Americans to pay for this. And in a sense, it's a revamping of the CARE Act. Here's how it's going to be proportioned out. Most of the money, remember, so it's $100 billion, but it's over 10 years, so it's really $10 billion per year. So of that, $4 billion is going to be reinvested into the states, territories, and tribal governments, and specifically targeting giving most to the areas that have the highest rate of opioid addictions and crises. This is so that local, state, etc. can deal with it more effectively, more locally. And of that, she would also put $2.7 billion to the highest hit cities, so $4 billion for just reinvestment, then again $2.7 for cities specifically, and she wants to put an additional $1.7 billion per year into public health surveillance research, which is of course figuring out what's happening so they can do more and more effectively, I suppose, and then another $1.1 billion, which is going to be given out to groups and nonprofits, something probably nearby that works with it would be affected by this, so that they can more readily help people in the hyperlocal region that they serve. And they're also planning to spend about $500 million per year of this, so that's about 5% of this budget, to get the drug naloxone, can't pronounce it, but it's true. And it is there so that first responders, when they go to a scene, or someone else, I assume, can go and give them a drug. So if they're overdosing, they won't die. Now, what's very interesting about this specifically, and why I think it's interesting that it's $500 million, is that a big issue, locally especially, and I've heard this many stories where the police department's like, we're not even going to buy it. It's such a waste of money. We spend this money. Because the drug is several $1,000s, because we do live in the U.S. health system. So this is a drug that keeps people from dying, and it is incredibly expensive, and many places can't afford it, and actually has bankrupted many departments in very small areas, which is why they're putting $500 million per year to spend on a drug that if they were able to negotiate, they would probably get for much less. But let's move on from there. So one thing I really like about this bill, what it's talking about, is it will have an emphasis on dealing with the core issues that fight these, and this is fantastic. This is what I'm always talking about, that if all you do is react to the effects as they happen, you do nothing, because you do nothing to stop them from happening in the first place. And if we can't stop things from happening preventatively, what are we doing except giving someone one pill a day for the rest of their life at $1 million over their life? So they're putting in new grants and doing many new things for substance abuse, dealing with people with depression, mental health disorders and the like, which I think is incredibly important. And I think that the bigger cause it'll turn out to be that people have lost a lot of meaning because they used to work at a steel factory for their entire life and they were the breadwinner, and now no one's going to hire a 50-year-old guy out of work with a high school degree. But let's keep moving on. So the downside of this is that this bill was, a version of it was passed in 2018, and it only got 81 co-sponsors in Congress, and the Senate, no one even took up a vote on it. I'm sure we have to thank Mitch McConnell for something to do about that. And another very important thing, and I really wish that people on the progressive left would bring up more often, I really wish and they don't, is that currently, according to Trump's own Council of Economic Advisors, the opioid crisis as it stands right now is costing the U.S. $500 billion in just 2015 when they have the numbers for that. So again, doing nothing, letting people die, costs enormous amounts of money. Preparing and decreasing this, because they're going to say, for a fact, they're going to say, that's $100 billion. That's too much money. Where are you going to get the money from? And I really wish that they would come back and say, your own numbers show it's already costing us. Well, if it's $10 billion a year that they're asking for to treat this, and it's costing us $500 billion, that 2 years of how much, if you just take 2015 numbers, 2 years would cost the same as this 10-year program.
Okay.
So if they're able to show, it should be pretty straightforward, that if they're able to cut it down by just, all they really have to do is have the thing pay for itself, which is just a few percentage points, this is worth it.
Right. So here's the thing. Actually, from the chat from our live stream, there are still over 100 million Americans who can't just smoke cannabis or grow one plant without worry about disproportionate penalties, fines, and even jail. I think it's very important that we also look at why this opioid crisis is happening. Daniel just mentioned right there, there's a huge shutdown of industrial facilities and work all across this country where, again, people were breadwinners for their families, and now they can't put food on the table. They can't pay the bills. And of course, not only on top of that, where a family is unable to provide for itself, where the breadwinners can't provide for their family, but also it's impacting communities and it's causing widespread depression. When Daniel and I went to Indiana, there's a lot of areas that have been hit because the industrial facilities have been shut down, work has been shut down, and we're talking about townships and cities that are basically almost abandoned. You could run down the middle of the street and you're not going to get hit by a car unless you're waiting for 30 minutes or so, or maybe 45 minutes. It's a bit of an over-exaggeration, but you guys got to get the point that in the Midwest states and all across the country as a whole, because this is a huge crisis, you have people who are depressed, and when people are depressed, they're going to go to something that's going to relieve that pain, and that opioid crisis that we have is just adding to it. So, Paul, I know you had a point in that, and I want to have Daniel add.
Yeah, I wanted to mention Freethinker59 in the chat mentions also that we could legalize kratom. So I think that combined with the legalization of cannabis could help all this. But I wanted to respond to a point that Daniel's making. That yes, it saves the U.S. government money if we invest in services to help people who could be overdosing and services for rehabilitation and things like that. But you know who won't do as well is the makers of Oxycontin and other opioids. Mm-hmm. They will stand to lose money. And in this case, that argument is being made in a disingenuous way. The argument that, oh, you know, it'll cost money if we do all these things, and how could we help people? How dare we help people? That costs money. That argument is disingenuous because you're right. By helping people, it saves the U.S. government money. But it's not about saving the U.S. government money. It's about making sure that pharmaceutical industries continue to make money off the deaths of American citizens.
And I would even go past that. It's not just the pharmaceutical companies that will be upset. Actually, I think they might even be support, because this is also a huge amount of money that's going to go into buying drugs that, of course, they're selling, but I think also is the prison system and the war on drugs all over again. So let's do a timeline really quick, just have a random, there's like 1,000 different ways this scenarios can play out in various places throughout the U.S. with different people leading different lives. But let's just go with one. We already talked about, let's talk about a hypothetical steel worker in Pennsylvania. They have been brought up their entire lives to say, if you can support your family, you're a good man. And that's the qualification to do. And probably some of them, are you going to church? And they do other things. But really it's, are you the breadwinner and can you feed your family? If you can do that, you're a good man and you're a good American. So if they can't do that, their entire identity falls apart, and that's a whole issue for them. They get more depressed. Their kids probably move out of state because that small coal town or that steel town or whatever they're in isn't doing that much for them. So everyone leaves, so the town is left with a bunch of people who have no skills except what they can't do because China now has those jobs, or someone else does, or someone in Mexico, or whatever it may be, wherever the factories are, that's the issue. So then they get to sit and they just get to be there day after day, having nothing to do, nothing to apply themselves to, feeling terrible that they can't support their family. They probably have to ask people for money. And then, of course, these are the people, remember, white people are the majority of welfare recipients, and we're talking these people as well because they don't have something to do, they don't want to move, they've lived there in their entire lives. So all of a sudden, they have an accident, they fall off a ladder, they're trying to fix their roof. Maybe they don't know how to fix the roof, but they can't hire someone to do it anymore. Yeah. So they try and fix the roof, and I'm gonna let you do with the Tulsi quote.
So we got a quote again. Hank Kerschel, man, you're an honorary captain, man. You were the best for doing this. Thank you again. You mentioned that Tulsi Gabbard has introduced legalization bill to legalize cannabis, And we will be talking about Tulsi Gabbard, so please stay tuned because we'll be talking about her. But I think there's another thing, too, that you want to add on there. So go ahead.
So I'm building this up. So we get to that point where this is the situation they live in. They're taking welfare, which they see as terrible. They aren't able to get their breadwinner. Their kids are moving out. Town is dead. They have nothing to do. Then they're fixing the roof and they break their leg or they break their foot. Or it doesn't really matter what happens. They go to their doctor. Their doctor has been paid by pharmaceutical industry and marketed for years and years and years to say, oh, you have pain. Here's some Oxycontin. Here's something. Here's some painkiller drug. So they go, they have this deep hole inside of them that they can't seem to fill. And all of a sudden, this drug makes the pain go away for the first time in years. And they don't feel this pain that they have before. So they keep using, but eventually the doctor doesn't prescribe anymore or they can't afford it. So then they start looking for heroines. That's the only thing, or maybe fentanyl, that can fill this hole that's inside of them. They do that long enough, they will either die of an overdose or they will be arrested and put in jail, where then they'll put into a prison labor system, because we know that for-profit prisons prefer the drug criminals because they're not violent and they take a little bit less of a maintenance to take care of. So this is someone in a system where they originally were able to build a family and make the U.S. a better country by, in this sense of, creating economy and perpetuating this wealth. And now they're costing American taxpayers every single day because of a system that is multifaceted and destroying them and thousands of others, to the point where the U.S. life expectancy is decreasing.
Yeah, and a few other things too about this opioid crisis. Look, the people who are addicted to opioids, they need help. Prison isn't going to solve the solution. And this crisis that's happening all across this country, if we don't invest into our communities, we're going to see more problems like this arise. But the United States is turning a blind eye. But we do have some congressional officials recognizing it, from the Democrats and Republicans, because it's finally impacted their families as well, because this opioid crisis is impacting people of various social demographics. Whether or not we actually step up and really look at why people are doing this is a whole other issue. But this is a national problem that will impact us and have a long-lasting scar in this country for years to come.